Despite everything that's gone on so far this season, the Timberwolves are still a top 5 team in the NBA. I'll make the case next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Happy game day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. That's right. The Timberwolves play tonight. They take on the Miami Heat for the second time in 4 days, second time in 3 games. This time back at Target Center after a bit of a road trip. One of the, first 4-game road trip the Wolves have had in a while. It ended a lot better than it started, that's for sure. And despite the kind of uneven vibes, and I think uneven's probably a pretty kind word, around the Timberwolves for most of the season, and especially the last, call it 2 to 3 weeks, Timberwolves are really good. And I know the schedule hasn't been great, and that's the one thing that kind of kept eating at me this whole time. But if you deep dive the numbers, Minnesota is a top 5 team in the NBA, almost no matter how you slice it, given all the factors. And I want to hit NBA.com. John Schumann does an awesome power ranking, and he actually has Minnesota 5th. And I'll talk a little bit about what he said, but I also want to talk about how they played against good teams, especially good defenses so far this year. The Timberwolves offense is actually traveling, right? The phrase defense is travel. Well, guess what? Minnesota's offense has been really impressive, and Anthony Edwards has been amazing here of late. So I want to dig in on all that stuff. We'll talk a little bit about the non-Gobert defensive minutes and also what that means about the with Gobert defensive minutes. And we'll look a little bit at Kevin Pelton's projected ESPN awards over at, ESPN. And we'll talk about Wolves Heat, which takes place tonight. It's all coming on the show. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. So I got this. I've been kind of toying with the idea of making the case for the Wolves as hey, they're still going to get a top 3 seed in the West for a long time. I'm not sure I'm ready to go that far. And here's the thing. Of the 5 best teams in the league, 4 of them could end up being in the Western Conference. When it's all said and done, obviously Detroit has been great. Get past them. The Knicks, the Celtics for what they are without Jason Tatum. And I guess there's a sliver of a possibility he comes back later. But you look at the best 5 teams in the league, and certainly OKC, I know they've struggled lately, and, hat tip Chris Finch on that. Thunder Twitter, if you will, Thunder fans on X is still just, hates Chris Finch so much. But thank you, Chris Finch. The Thunder have been playing not as good lately. They're obviously still the best team in the league. The Spurs, especially with Wemby, Houston, those are probably the 3 best teams in the league, right? You get past that, Denver without Jokic, and they just recently got, some guys back from injury. Christian Brown, Cam Johnson's injured. They got Jokic back, and now Jokic is now out. Now Valanciunas is hurt. It's too bad because it's fun to watch the Nuggets with a deep roster around Jokic, which they haven't really had at all, but especially in the last couple of seasons, 3 seasons really. But when you look at all the factors, Minnesota's right up there. So we'll start with the power rankings that John Schumann has at NBA.com, and I think he's got some interesting stuff. So the way he's got it ranked, he actually has the Spurs at number 1, and his power rankings are essentially weighted based a little bit, weighted towards what's happened most recently, which I think is fair. So he's got the Spurs first. I would still put OKC first. Then he's got OKC. Then he's got side note, though, what the Spurs have done when Wemby's not available is impressive. I did not think the Spurs would be this good. I'll be accountable to that. At some point, we'll look back at what I said preseason. I think I had them as a play-in team. They're obviously incredible. He's got the Pistons 3. He's got Houston 4. And he's got Minnesota 5, up from 7 last week. And this is a week that included the arguably worst loss of the season, the Atlanta loss New Year's Eve afternoon. That was brutal. But as Schumann put it, comfortable wins over Miami and Washington, that helps, right? And Miami's good, and Washington had won 4 of 5, and so Schumann talks a little bit about how they've been a really good when they start well, when they take a lead early, they are in great shape, which is true of everybody. But like if you look at all the teams that get off to a good start, it's very important for Minnesota. If they get up by double digits, they're 19-2. Schumann talks about that. He talks about how turnovers are a bellwether for Minnesota. We've talked about that on this show in a while, but I think it's still true. And then like he also logs offensive rating, defensive rating. I'm assuming he uses NBA.com the advanced stats at what is it? Stats.nba.com. And he's got the Wolves offense at 8th and the Wolves defense at 7th. However, I'm going to jump over to Cleaning the Glass, which is phenomenal, and I use it all the time. If you're not familiar, they filter out garbage time. They filter out end of quarter heaves, or end of quarter possessions that are basically full court heaves. The bigger thing is the garbage time being filtered out. So according to Cleaning the Glass, Minnesota is 6th in both offense and defense entering play on Monday. I'm recording this before all of the games on Monday night take place. They're one of just 3 teams in the entire NBA that are top 6 in both offense and defense, according to Cleaning the Glass. Of course, OKC, who's 1st in defense and only 5th in offense, and then Houston, who's 4th in defense and 3rd in offense. And honestly, Houston, I don't say it has been a surprise because I knew they'd be good. Everyone knew they'd be good. They're far better than I expected them to be this season. I think far better is probably fair. And for them to be top 4, and they're the only team that's top 4 in both categories, right? Minnesota is one of 3 teams that's top 6 in both offense and defense. And that's really impressive. That's a really important and impressive statistic. And that right there kind of makes Minnesota cut above some of these other teams. And we could talk about the Wemby stuff. Like the Spurs have been good without him. With him, like, are they better than Minnesota? Well, maybe. Probably. Denver with Jokic, yeah, they're the best offense in the league. And they've been better without Jokic on the floor than they have been in some of the past seasons, and in large part due to the improved depth that they have now. Valanciunas and Cam Johnson and others. The return of Bruce Brown. But Denver's awful defensively. They're bottom 3rd of the league defensively, and nobody else, if you look at the top 10 teams in the NBA, has a bottom 3rd unit on either side of the floor. And Denver's defense has been so bad that come playoff time, and we'll see how they survive the next probably month without Nikola Jokic, that's going to be interesting. So sitting here right now, if you factor in the Jokic injury, you make the case for OKC, you make the case for San Antonio, you make the case for Houston, that's fine. Detroit, yes. So that means for your 5th best team in the league, it's Minnesota, the Jokic-less Nuggets, the Celtics, of course, Tatum-less Celtics, and the Knicks. And I can build a case for Minnesota being 5th best team in the league. Again, they're the only one of those teams that's top 6 in both categories. Denver has a bad defense. Boston's got a very middle-of-the-pack defense. And the Knicks have a very middle-of-the-pack defense. All 3 of those teams, like on Cleaning the Glass right now, Celtics defense is 15th. New York's is 16th. The Nuggets is 21st. And then that leaves, who's the other team I mentioned? Oh, the Jokic-less Nuggets, who we just talked about. So Minnesota's the only one of those teams that has a good defense. And not only that, when Rudy Gobert is on the floor, it is a downright dominant defense. And we've talked about that quite a bit. Actually, let's do that now. And then I want to talk about how Minnesota's performed offensively against some of the best defenses. So we'll do that in a second. But the Gobert defensive minutes are so impressive. And this is actually the best on-off of Gobert's career. Now, a quick note about on-off. That says as much about the guys who are playing when an individual player is off the floor as it does about that player, in my opinion. And Gobert right now has a 100th percentile on-off. The Timberwolves defense is 16 points worse when he is off the floor. Or actually, I guess the right way to say that would be they allow 16 points less, 16.2 points less per 100 possessions when he plays. Only once in his career was that number north of 10. And that was way back in 2020, 2021 when he was still at the Jazz. That team was not as 98th percentile mark. They were a little over 12 points better defensively with him on the floor. Last year's Minnesota team was 7.8 points better with him on the floor. This year's 16.2. It's just unbelievable. And then the other way to look at this, and this has been said, I don't know how many times, how many different ways, but if you've missed it, if you're unaware, with Gobert, any 5-man lineup that the Timberwolves have with Rudy Gobert on the court has a defense that has only the Thunder has a better defensive rating, and the Thunder are the league's best defense by far. They were last year as well. Minnesota with Gobert on the floor only allows 108 points per 100 possessions. 108 points per 100 possessions. OKC is the only team with a better mark than that, and they're at 104.9. So basically 105 points per 100 possessions. Gobert on the floor, Minnesota's defense would rank 2 in the NBA. Now, with him off the floor, it's last, dead last. I'll pull that up real quick, but they're dead last defensively when Gobert's off the floor. And therein lies, that I guess lays out the map for why the on-off looks the way it does. With him off the floor, Minnesota allows 124.2 points per 100 possessions. That is dead last, worse than Utah's 122.9. So like a point and a half worse per 100 possessions without Gobert on the floor. It's unreal, the difference. And yes, it's a case for Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not going to make that case now. It's not going to happen for Rudy. There's other worthy candidates. And actually, we'll talk a little bit about it later in light of ESPN's Kevin Pelton's kind of, what are we, third, almost halfway through the season projections for awards. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the fact that the Timberwolves are the worst defense in the league with Gobert off the floor and the second best with him on the floor just shows you how important he is, and also how bad the Naz Reid Julius Randle defensive pairing is. No matter how you slice it, it's miserable. So the Gobert stuff is super important. And again, in theory, in a playoff series, more Gobert equals better defense equals a better playoff team. And that, we can go back and rehash the OKC conference finals last year, and Minnesota probably doesn't win no matter how much Gobert plays, but they were good with him on the floor. And so that leads me to think there's still more for this team on the defensive end of the floor moving forward into the playoffs if they lean into the Gobert minutes more. And perhaps the more data they have that the Reid Randle minutes are terrible, the higher likelihood there is that Gobert plays more minutes in the playoffs than he has the past couple of years. All right. I want to talk about the Timberwolves offense. Minnesota's offense has performed against the league's best defenses. Also relevant for tonight's game against the Heat. We'll see if Minnesota can beat the Heat zone for the second time in as many tries this season, second time in as many as 4 days currently. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Fridays already feel different during basketball season, and FanDuel's making them even better. Every Friday night before the games tip off, FanDuel gives fans a new way to kick off the weekend with NBA Happy Hour. NBA Happy Hour is your official pregame, a limited time window where special offers drop right inside the FanDuel app before the action starts. Fridays from 6 to 7:30 Eastern, that's 5 to 6:30 Central Time, have become appointment viewing with NBA Happy Hour. Open the FanDuel app during happy hour. It'll bring something new to you every time. Boosts, bonuses, surprises, and more. It's easy to check the weekly special before tip-off and make a move before the window closes. The timing is perfect. Right before the games, right before the weekend starts. It adds extra energy to Friday night basketball without overthinking it. So before tip-off, check the FanDuel app and see what's dropping during NBA Happy Hour every Friday from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. That's 5 to 6:30 Central. A little basketball, a little action, and a whole lot of Friday energy. That's NBA Happy Hour, only on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends at Quo. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make. And that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo. That's spelled Q-U-O. The smarter way to run your business communications. Because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. Quo makes everything so simple. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number so nothing gets missed. Plus, everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster and more personal. It works right from your phone or computer. You can even keep your existing number if you want, and Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps so details never slip through the cracks. It's no surprise Quo is the #1 rated business phone system on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free. Plus, get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNBA. Again, that's Quo, QUO.com/LockedOnNBA. Quo. No missed calls, no missed customers. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And of course, thanks for helping to make us the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out the new Everydayer Club. You can get access to an ad-free audio feed for Locked On Wolves, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Plus, you can get an invite to the members-only Locked On Every Day Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of Locked On shows. You can go to lockedonwolves.supercast.com to sign up. That's lockedonwolves.supercast.com, or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. All right, let's talk about the Timberwolves offense against some of the league's best defenses. It has been consistent this year, and honestly, I was a little bit surprised. On Cleaning the Glass, again, you can sort this. Apparently, just a big plug for Cleaning the Glass, but it is great. You can sort how every team is performing against the league's top 10 offenses, middle 10 offenses, and bottom 10. You can do the same thing for defenses. So the Timberwolves' defense against top offenses has been pretty meh. I think overall against top 10 differential teams, they're 5-5, but they have a losing record against some of the top offensive teams. No, I said that wrong. The top defense. No, I said that right. The top offensive teams in the league. So against, I think they're 4-7 or something. I'll pull it up right now. Minnesota against the top offensive teams in the league this year so far is exact. Yeah, 4-7. They have a minus 3.1 differential. However, against the top defensive teams in the league, Minnesota's offense has held up entirely well. So far this year, Timberwolves are 5-3 against the best defenses in the league. They have wins against OKC, Miami, the Spurs, the Warriors, and the Mavericks, who, believe it or not, have the league's 10th best defense. Anthony Davis has played enough to make that the case. And Golden State also has maintained a good defense. Their only losses have been to the Suns twice, both frustrating, and the Thunder, which, understandable. So 5-3 against the best defenses. Miami's the most relevant one, which we'll talk about a little bit more later when we preview the matchup. And they perform extremely well against the Heat zone. And overall this season, Minnesota has been one of the best teams against the zone in the entire league. And that's more relevant for the Heat conversation than the rest of it. So I'll save that for a little bit later. But just know that Minnesota has basically been the best team against the zone offensively, which is crazy considering how bad they were the last couple of years. It was like without Kyle Anderson on the floor 2 years ago, they couldn't do it. Last year, they couldn't do it. This year, great against the zone. They figured it out a little bit. And all this as well, they haven't really shot the ball well for the last few weeks. They started the year shooting well from three. They've sunk down into the middle third of the league in terms of three-point shooting as a team. So all that to say, good against the zone. The OKC win was great. They had a good game plan. They've beaten the Spurs without Wemby, but again, those Spurs have been good without Wemby. And I think a lot of this has to do with Anthony Edwards elevating his game. I think that sounds super oversimplified, but it's not. He's been awesome. He is a shoo-in at this point. If he plays like he is right now, obviously all-star, second-team All-NBA for the third straight year. We're talking about, he is now, for the first time in his career, knocking at the door 30 points per game. And, with the Jokic injury, obviously SGA right now would still be the leader in the clubhouse in terms of MVP. But Ant's going to be on the ballot if Minnesota ends up with the top 4 seed and Ant averages 30 a game on 50, 40, 80 shooting splits. That's what we have right now. Ant's shooting, and it's antiquated to just field goal percentage. So we could talk 2-point percentage all day, 58% from 2, which is nuts for a guard. And also for somebody who's increased their usage in the mid-range. And we'll unpack this more later. But for today's show, he's shooting 50, 40, 80 right now as a guard. 50.6% from the field overall after shooting under 45% last year. He's 40% from 3 on nearly the volume that it was last year. Still the second greatest volume of his career. And again, the 2-point percentage, 58%. His next best for his career is 51.9%. So he's 6.3 points better 2-point percentage wise than his next best 2-point percent season. The free throw shooting hasn't been quite as good, but it's still at 80%, which, the last 2 years he's been almost at 84, but the first 3 years he was in the 75 to 78% range. So not horrible. It's just, we know it can be a little bit better. The shot mix for Ant is a huge piece of this, right? He's getting to the rim more than he did last year. He's getting to the free throw line more than he did last year. And yes, he is shooting more mid-range jumpers, but he's shooting 47%. He's 46.7% from 10 feet to the 3-point line. That's an incredible percentage. I mean, those are tough shots by and large. He's also shooting the best of his career from the 3 to 10-foot range. He's shooting, percentage-wise, the best in his career from within 3 feet of the bucket. He's almost 78% field goal percentage within 3 feet of the rim, which is crazy. So Could some of this come back down to earth? Yeah, maybe. And I would say the rim stuff is probably most likely just because that's an astronomical number for a guy who takes as much contact as Ant does. And that's always been kind of a bugaboo for him, is why he doesn't finish better at the rim. But the answer is because it's the Shaq syndrome. If you've listened to the show before, you've heard me say, guys bounce off Ant. He's too strong. He's too athletic. He avoids contact, or when he feels it, he goes through it. He doesn't ever flop, embellish, etc. He yells, hey, it's annoying. He throws his hands in the air. It's annoying. But it's because dude doesn't get foul calls that he should, because he is getting hit, but guys bounce off him. Remember the marginal contact the marginal contact call against OKC, 3 years ago, when SGA grabbed his arm, had his fingers wrapped around his arm when Ant was dunking. Incredible dunk toward the end of a Wolves win in OKC. And it was called marginal contact in the last 2-minute report. You can literally see his fingers wrapped around Ant's arm. That stuff is happening to Ant on a regular basis. And yet he's still finishing at almost 78% at the rim. It's incredible. I worry a little bit about coming back down to earth in the mid-range, but at the same time, we said that about the three-point shot all last year. Turns out, when Ant works on something throughout the summer and says, I'm going to get good at it, it's a little Kobe-like in that he works on a thing and then he becomes great at it. It's unreal. Ant has been phenomenal offensively. The defensive stuff, he slipped a little bit there. I think he's every bit as good on the ball when he wants to be, but I think some of the gains he made last year with attention on defense and dedication on defense, we've lost a little bit of that. And hopefully but when he wants to lock in, he can. And that's kind of the whole point of this conversation that I'm having on the show today, is that's the story of the Wolves. They play good against good teams. They're 5-5 against the league's, top 10 teams in terms of point differential. And ultimately, I think they're better than that. They had the couple, fluky Lakers losses. They had the Nuggets lost in overtime, which they played well in that game, other than the collapse at the end. Go through it, and you can do this with any team. But honestly, the thing about the Wolves this year isn't that they don't play the good teams well. It's that they have had bad losses against bad teams and bad losses at times against good teams, but they aren't blowout losses, right? They're execution issues. They're things that kind of collapse toward the end of the game, stuff like that are fixable. And we've seen them do it to the tune of 2 conference finals appearances in the last 2 years. So this team plays to their competition and is a lot like Anthony Edwards in that regard. The team goes as Ant goes, which it shouldn't be a surprise, but that's why this is all kind of inextricably linked together. I want to close today's show by talking specifically about the matchup against the Heat. We'll talk about the Wolves' numbers against the zone so far this season, and that's how we'll close out the show today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Gametime. During basketball season, there's nothing like being in the building. The energy, the crowd, the first big run that gets everyone on their feet. Fans want to be there for those moments, not stuck refreshing the screens or guessing what tickets are really going to cost. And the Wolves are finally back home tonight, Tuesday night against Miami. It's an NBC game. Should be a ton of fun. Be in the arena. And that's where Gametime comes in. The Gametime app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets. Fast, simple, and without the guesswork. Browsing through the Gametime app is straightforward and intuitive. Finding tickets takes just a few taps. Seeing the view from your seat before buying makes choosing tickets easy, and it should instill confidence in you with how easily you can get your tickets. Prices include fees up front, so the total is clear from the start. That is my favorite part. Plus, features like zone deals help unlock great seats at even better value, whether it's an NBA game or maybe it's just another live event you want to attend. Everything is right there in one place. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today and get in on the action. All right, Wolves Heat tonight for the second time in 4 days. Minnesota won in Miami by 10 on Saturday. And it was a relatively easy win for the Timberwolves. A fun game overall. Miami, a team that plays a ton of zone. They lead the league once again in terms of their frequency of playing the zone. And Minnesota has the best numbers going up against zone defense of any team that's faced the zone. I think it's over 3% of the time. Over 3% of the time. For any team that's faced a zone over 3% of the time, Minnesota has the most points per possession. They are the best offensively among teams that have faced the zone at least 3% of the time, which doesn't sound like a lot, but nobody's faced a zone. Let's see. There's 2 teams that have faced the zone more than 7% of the time. And one of them, of course, is OKC. The other is Detroit, who still doesn't quite have enough shooting. So teams that want to dare teams to shoot are more likely to play zone, right? So there are 19 teams that have faced a zone more than 3% of the time. Minnesota has the best offense among those teams. They have scored 1.193, so almost 1.2 points per possession against the zone, and they face the zone 3.5% of the time. Again, Minnesota's a good shooting team, so they're kind of middle. They are exactly middle of the pack. They're 15th in terms of how often they face the zone. But again, of the 19 teams that have faced the zone at least 3% of the time, Minnesota has the most points per possession, 1.193 points per possession. Only 2 teams have a higher mark, and it's the Knicks and Warriors who face the zone around 1% of the time. So in the Heat game specifically, according to Synergy, which does a good job of logging, is an awesome tool also. I'm just out here plugging sites today, cleaning the glass, and Synergy. Synergy does an awesome job. They don't quite get everything when it comes to like how many possessions you played against the zone. So in the Miami game, it says Minnesota played 30 possessions against the zone. I do think that I think that's actually probably underestimating it a little bit. They played somebody else recently where I felt the same way. Was it the Denver game or maybe even the Milwaukee game where it said they played the zone 20 against 26 possessions against the zone? But in 30 possessions against the zone, Minnesota scored 1.429 points per possession against the zone. Remember, they're a little under 1.2 for the season. So they were on point against Miami. And that's what the Heat do. Like he just play zone all the time. So I mean, not literally all the time, but I would not expect them to do anything drastically differently, at least in terms of like man versus zone. I mean, it's possible that they, I guess it's possible that they choose to tweak something with how they handle their zone overall, or how they execute their zone, I should say, instead of just, doing the exact same thing. But overall this season, Miami deploys the zone 10.1% of the time. So it's actually second to Milwaukee, which is the other team I just mentioned that Minnesota faced a lot of zone, a Giannis-less Bucks team. Milwaukee plays the zone almost 12.5% of the time. The Heat are 10.1% of the time. So they did it more than that against Minnesota, trying to dare a Timberwolves team that's been struggling from deep. DiVincenzo struggled from deep, trying to dare them to shoot the ball from the perimeter. And Minnesota did a great job in that game and ended up hanging 125 points on Miami in a regular 48-minute game. No overtime needed to get to 125 for Minnesota in that game. Remember, Ant had 33. He knocked out. He was just 2 of 8 from 3. Minnesota as a team was only 11 of 38. So it wasn't just the 3-point shooting, but it was navigating the zone in a smart way and also screening the zone, which is like you might hear in like middle school, don't screen the zone. Well, you have to screen the zone in the NBA. You just have to do it. Gobert was pretty good in the middle of it. This was one of Gobert's, he's had a lot of strong games recently, 13 and 12 in Miami. In this one, he had 4 offensive rebounds. That's the other thing, is to rebound against the zone. There's going to be second chance opportunities for Minnesota against Miami's zone. And so they're going to have to take advantage of that. Overall, like Miami's a really good defense, but because they play so much zone, they're much more middle of the pack when it comes to rebounding. Like that's another one of those things that you hear it when you're younger. There is some truth to it, albeit at the NBA level, like there's still an expectation you're going to rebound. But for a team that's third in defense, their worst aspect of their 4 factors is their defensive rebound. They're 13th in the NBA, which is fine, right? Like it's good. It's actually 1 spot ahead of Minnesota. They're slightly better defensive rebounding than the Timberwolves are. But it is an area you can exploit. If they're in the zone, Minnesota has got a shot to get second chance opportunities, and Gobert's been great on the offensive glass here recently. So that's something to keep an eye on for sure. So offensive rebounding, screening the zone needs to happen. Knocking down threes when they get the opportunity. Again, they didn't shoot it well in Miami on Saturday. They were 28%, 29% from 3. But they did all the other stuff well enough that they could get away with it. They also turned Miami over a bunch. Miami committed 18 turnovers in that game. Minnesota committed 14, which is too many, but you can handle that if they're going to turn it over as much as they did. And in general, like Miami plays so fast that they're kind of baking in some turnovers. Overall, they're actually pretty good at not turning the ball over for how fast they play. But that's something that Minnesota is going to want to be careful with is if Miami's not turning it over, it's a pretty fast, efficient offense at times. with the Heat. I mean, they're middle of the pack overall offensively, but again, they play fast. They don't actually turn it over that much for a team that plays fast. They give themselves a lot of bites at the apple in terms of just sheer number of possessions. So that's something to keep an eye out for. There's also a chance Tyler Hero plays. He apparently was questionable Sunday and did not play. I can't find anywhere where, like, as of this recording, he's not officially on the injury report, but he didn't play Sunday. So I don't really know what's going on there. There's a pretty good chance he plays, which changes things a little from their offense. It obviously adds more shooting, a little bit more of a more dynamic element to their team. So something else to keep an eye out for in this one. But I actually don't mind the Miami matchup all that much when it comes, for Minnesota. Sitting here right now, Minnesota's favored by 1 point at home with our friends at FanDuel. So something else to keep an eye on. Like, it should be a good game, especially if Tyler Hero is playing. But with the way Ant's playing and the way he should be able to navigate the zone. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, I like Jalen Clark in the middle of the zone. We talked about this on yesterday's show, the post-game pod after Sunday's win, that Minnesota is, what was the stat I had? I think they're 16-2 when Jalen Clark plays 16 or more minutes. Maybe it was 14-2 when he plays 16 or more minutes this season. And last time around, Wolves and Heat on Saturday, Jalen Clark only played 5 minutes. And there was another game, it might have been the Bucks game, where I liked Jalen Clark in the middle of the zone. And I know he usually is in the corners, but I mean, he's a good enough passer. He's not a big body, but he's also not a threat from outside the arc. And so if you need him defensively, like if Tyler Hero's playing and you want to, muck things up a little bit with Jalen Clark, put him in the middle of the zone, put him at the nail on the offense and see what happens. I think that'd be an interesting wrinkle if Minnesota did that a little bit more frequently. All right. So I got for you today. Of course, we'll have the post-game pod tomorrow, the live postcast tonight following Wolves Heat with our guys, Jack and Luke. You can listen to it after the fact right here on the audio feed. If you're watching on YouTube, those guys go live almost immediately after, like 10 minutes after the games on the Lockdown Wolves YouTube channel. So watch there and listen after the fact if you miss it live right here on the Lockdown Wolves audio feed. I'll be back on Wednesday with it'll post overnight into Wednesday, the post-game pod following Wolves Heat. So tune in for that. A big thank you for making Lockdown Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Lockdown Wolves. And also a reminder about the Everydayer Club. You can sign up to get Lockdown Wolves ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. You can head to lockdownwolves.supercast.com to join the club. Of course, Lockdown Wolves is also part of the very same Lockdown Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Lockdown Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.